The reason your arrangement sucks is that you're not adding enough movement and progression to your blocks. Simple tips like adding drum fills and automation will just add the extra 5% to your track so it's a lot less repetitive. So I'm going to show you several tricks on how to make your arrangement a lot more interesting and a lot less repetitive. By the way, my name is EAStranjah and I've been making music for over 25 years with music on Metalheadz, Hospital Records, and Critical Music. I'm here now to pass on the knowledge to you. So here's a 16 bar block that I made. Pretty repetitive right now, but we'll add a bunch of things so this entire section will evolve, become a lot more interesting. And by the way, the break that you're hearing here is coming out on a new pack by Acid Lab on Deviant Audio. You can learn more down in the links below. Here's a few more breaks from the Acid Lab pack just so you can get a taste. There's also tons of sick bass and stab hits in this pack. So check the link below to learn more about the Acid Lab pack. It's coming out soon. And here's the bass line for this track. I made it off Serum. And then I have this effects rack where I split the bass into the high and low signal. I have the low signal here. And here's the high signal. I added a bunch of effects. Mainly there's an OTT and there's a clipper to really take this bass sound to the next level. So here's the sound on its own. Here's OTT pushing it. And I'm just using clipper to clip it a little more. Just find it makes it sound fatter. And then combining the low and high signal. Just sounds super fat. If you want the preset for this bass sound, you can find it down in the links below. So if your track has a lead sound or a bass sound, the first thing you can do to introduce more movement is find a parameter such as a filter or distortion, whatever effect that you're using on your track. Find a parameter in that effect and then create a subtle movement. Essentially, you can use the automation lane and find the parameter and gradually increase the movement as the 16 bar block progresses. Now you can just use a simple riser. For example, let's go into this bass sound that we had. Perhaps we can modulate the OTT frequency and we can draw a dot here and then draw a dot here so it gradually increases. Other common shapes I like to use for 16 bar blocks are the triangle. So instead of a point up there, you can have a point like here. So it goes up in the middle and down. Or you can do a V shape. So completely opposite. Start high, low, and high. Essentially, you're just finding an effect and creating movement with it. So today's video is sponsored by Excite Audio. I'm actually going to be using their new plugin, Motion Harmonic, which is a really innovative tool to create movement with effects to your track. Essentially, it's an effects rack with bit crushing, distortion, and a number of filters. And the parameters for each one of these effects can be mapped to each one of these nodes. And what's really interesting is these nodes, when mapped to different effects, can respond to your cursor. And it could either attract the nodes or you can set it to repel the nodes. And this creates a really interesting and innovative way to create motion in your tracks. The cool thing here is you can let Motion Harmonic do all the work in terms of figuring out a modulation path. So it removes all the thinking involved when you're trying to figure out ways and how to modulate a sound. Just map a bunch of effects parameters to the nodes and then find a cool shape, and then Motion Harmonic will do the effects automation. If you want to grab a copy of Motion Harmonic, it's actually available at a discount right now. You can learn more down in the links below. So what I've done here is I mapped this node up here to the tone of the distortion. I mapped this node on the bottom right to the peak frequency of the peak filter. And up here, I've mapped the sample rate of the bit crusher. And then this bottom left one, I've mapped the drive of the distortion. So as this magnet moves across, it's going to affect the nodes. And because I've set the rate at which this moves across the line to 16 bars, we'll now have a movement across our 16 bar block. So no section within our block should sound the same. This is an awesome way to create motion in our track. So let's listen to Motion Harmonic affect the top bass through the 16 bars. It reminds me of the good old Virus recording days. Shouts out to Ed Rush and Optical, where they have a gnarly bass line such as Reese, and there's movement throughout the track. Pretty nasty. Here's a quick automation I made with Motion Harmonic. It's following, the magnet is following this circle, and you can see every time it moves, it's attracting the circles. You can also click repel and then repel these nodes. So these nodes will then adjust the parameter as it moves up and down this line. And it's currently modulating a bunch of the effects. I think it's modulating the distortion, bit crusher, and the filters. You can check it out. Sounds pretty dope. What we can do is we can start from scratch. I'll show you quickly how you can use this. So for example, we can start with the drive, and we can pull the drive into node 2. We can pull the tone of the drive to node 1. We can pull the sample rate of the bit crusher to node 4. Maybe a filter as well. So maybe we can add the frequency of the peak filter to number 5. Maybe even spread of the peak filter up here. And by the way, the peak filter is pretty cool. If you increase the gain, you'll see it bumps up here, and the number here increases the number of peaks. So it's like a comb filter. You can adjust the spread. The spread is how far each node spreads across. And then up here, you can find a number of different shapes in the simple paths area. So for example, a circle might sound good. To see the shape, you just gotta go down here, and now you can move the circle wherever you like. And then when you hit play, it'll then move the cursor around the circle. You can change the time to like a 1 bar or like 2 bars, or maybe 8 bar for our pattern if we want more movement. Let's make it just 4 bars so we can actually hear what's happening. And you can make this node either attract the nodes, or you can click and repel, and then when it comes near the nodes, it'll repel them. It'll just make these nodes move out like that. You can also adjust the range. So right now this range pushes them all the way out, right? Depends on what you want, right? And then the strength as well as how far does it push this knob. So let's hear what happens when we hear this modulate. It's pretty dope and gnarly. The bit crushing might be too extreme, so you find that the bit crushing range is too far. You can use this cursor, adjust the min and max amount for the node, right? So peak frequency I think is okay. Maybe increase it up to like 500. Let's see what this one here, that's the tone of the distortion, the drive. Here's the sample rate. So maybe the sample rate can be maybe there. Decrease the max so it's not as extreme on that bit crushing. And then you just got to make sure you're back to attract or repel mode. And that sounds pretty dirty. Let's hear it over our beat. I like this little 3D blob icon. I think it's a visual representation of how the node is affecting all the little effects. So it kind of just gives you an idea of what's happening. A visual cue, if you say. So it gives you a really neat way to create movement in your tracks, whether you want to do it to your bass lines or maybe your lead synth melody. The next thing you're going to do to introduce more movement within your 16 bar block is to use call and response. If you wanted to use the same bass sound and pattern, but you want to introduce some alterations, what you can do is every cycle just change something about the bass. So here what I've done is instead of the same pattern playing every 2 bars, I've made a copy of Serum and then I've cut it up so that every other one plays this one down here. But with a second instance of Serum with the same preset, we can make changes to that sound so that we have some call and response. An easy thing you can do is you can take the bass, go into Serum, maybe take the top note and make it an octave higher. Or if you don't want to do that, we can change the effects on the actual instance of the second bass line. So what I'm doing here is I'm using Motion Harmonic again. However, this time I'm taking the peak filter, and what I've done is I've introduced a different frequency range. I've also increased the number of peaks. So this is cool about the peak filter here is you can add these additional peaks. So now it's like a comb filter. You can adjust the gains of these peaks and also the spread. So before I had a more narrow sound, probably something like that. And then as you change it to a more peaky bass line, you'll have something more like this. So a lot more nasal. So now you can switch between the 2 sounds because this one has a completely different filter on it. So let's hear the call and response in action. All right, and this is a lot more interesting. And remember, the first instance of Serum still has that 16 bar movement with Motion Harmonic, just that the other 16 is using a completely different filter setting. So now we get more of a call and response when we switch between the 2 patterns. All right, so our 16 bar block is coming along. Another thing we can do to add more interest is to add subtle changes to your drum programming. So right now, this drum loop is just repeating every bar. Simple thing we can do is add a small little change on every 4th bar. So that could be at the beginning or end of the 4 bar sequence, or sometimes you can add a subtle change in between. Use your ear and feel it out. See what the track is asking for. For this one, I want a double kick at the end of the 4th bar. So over here, I'm going to introduce a kick. So I'm going to take this kick and just put one here. So now we have this. All right, so that's a 4 bar sequence. And then what you can do is take that 4 bars and just repeat it all the way through. So now you have a repeating 4 bar section as opposed to a repeating 1 bar section, which is a lot more repetitive. Now it's less repetitive because there's a change at every 4th bar. The next thing you can do to add more variation is to add changes every 8 bar. So this time within the 8 bar section, I'm going to add a change at the beginning of the 8th bar. And what I'm going to do is just introduce a pause at that kick. A pause can do wonders. So now I'm just going to remove this 8 bars and copy this 8 bars and duplicate it. And now it's a lot more interesting. Let's just listen from the middle here. Dirty. Another thing you can do to your tracks is adding drum fills at the end of the 8 bar or end of the 16 bar section, especially the 16 bar section. If you make a change there, now you have a section that's completely different, entire 16 bars. Right now, with our changes, we have a repeating 8 bar section. You can just make a small change, such as adding a drum fill at the last 16th bar. Now you have a 16 bar block that's completely unique. Now, one trick is to introduce a completely different break at the 16 bar mark. However, if you want to keep the same break, what you can do is just move it to a different track and add effects to this break. So once again, I'm using Motion Harmonic, and this time I'm using this interesting butterfly shape. I've mapped the parameter to the sample rate of the bit crush. So what this is going to do is create a kind of a filter bit crushing effect when this break passes through Motion Harmonic. So check out the break. just adds a bit of variation. And just for good measure, I'll also take this one here and put it here as well. So we can check out the section. We'll check it from here. Alright, a lot more movement and change-ups in our track. Finally, when I have a drum switch up at the 8th or 16th bar position, I like to accompany that with a completely different bass. So instead of continuing with this bass sound, I'm going to remove this bar here, and we're going to add a Reese sound right over here. So this Reese here, I'm going to color green. Just a simple pattern. We'll repeat it here. Just makes it less repetitive now, because now we have a completely different bass. It kind of helps that switch up as well. Here's a simple trick when writing switch up bass lines. So the bass sound is playing a G here. Just make sure your bass sound, the switch up bass, is also playing a G, and then there'll be a lot more continuity. Difference here is I added an additional note on a higher octave here for a different vibe. Of course, you can play with different keys as well. Just make sure you're on the same scale, then you'll have more continuity. Once you have a strong 16 bar block or section, then it becomes a lot more easy to arrange your track, because you can take this section and make copies. It's not as redundant when you make copies now, because there's so much change within the 16 bar block. But now that we have 2 copies of this block, you can then add or remove percussion within each repetition of the 16 bar block. So common thing I like to do is add a fast shaker at the second iteration to add more energy. You see, now we're adding changes at a more macro level. Before, we were focusing on the 16 bar section and making subtle variations. Once you feel strong about the 16, moving into more macro level arrangement, writing the progression of the song, we can then make change ups such as adding a different percussive loop. We can also change up the automation of the bass line. Maybe we want to change the shape or some of the parameters in motion harmonics, so the second iteration is different. But that just gives you a lot more room and creative ideas to help your arrangement along, so it's a lot less repetitive. Remember, we started here with a very simple and repetitive pattern, and then we ended up over here with a lot more switch ups and movement across your track. That's thanks to just little edits, automation effects, and additional drum sound. And easily you can make your track more interesting. All right, now that we have the arrangement, let's check it out. Oh yeah, and that's a vibe. So those are just a few tricks to help you make your composition a lot more interesting, and also help you make arranging your track a lot more easier. Let me know what tip you liked most. If I missed anything, then comment down below. If you want to support, I have a number of preset packs, sample packs, and Ableton kits to help you along your journey. You can learn more down in the links below. And once again, today's video is sponsored by Excite Audio. You can learn more and pick up Motion Harmonic down below. It's available now at a discounted price. If you want to learn more about arranging drum and bass in jungle, then check this video up here. If you want to learn more about making gnarly bass lines, check this video up here. All right, that's pretty much it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Keep practicing, and I'll see you at the next video.